This is what a clampdown looks like in a place that is actually part of Europe where we all go on holiday, and it is going through an ugly crackdown now. The dots between Trump and Erdogan and Putin are becoming clearer and clearer every day.
And yet, from parts of the West, certainly from America, there has been silence. And look at Donald Trump's views on his opponents, that they're all wild-eyed fanatics, they're Marxists, they are scum, they should be locked up. That's exactly what Erdogan is doing. Erdogan is taking Trump at his word in the way that he is treating opposition leaders.
That was the sound of the streets of Istanbul last night. Thousands have headed onto the streets in what are now illegal protests. They have been banned by the government, by President Erdogan, after he called for the arrest and subsequent jailing of the man who is essentially the chief opposition leader, the biggest threat to his presidency.
It looks like Turkey, once a proud democracy, is sliding into dictatorship. And why does that matter? It matters because Turkey is a member of NATO. It plays a vital role in the Middle East, plays a role in Ukraine, Russia. It affects all of us. Welcome to the News Agents. It's John.
It's Emily. And it all began last Wednesday, nearly a week ago, with the arrest of a very popular, very charismatic politician, Istanbul's mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu. He was taken away, detained on, and I'm going to use my quotation marks here, terrorism charges, corruption charges, spurious charges, say him and his party, the CHP, sparked by a rivalry, a jealousy, a sense that he was a threat to Erdogan's presidency. He was held for 5 days, and during those days, any protests were banned. They have been outlawed, but they have still happened. And on Sunday morning, very early, a court decreed that he was guilty of those charges. They've sent him to jail. And after that, the protests on the streets of Istanbul and other major cities got even louder.
And if you think there's no smoke without fire, there must be something in it of the charges. Let me just give you one data point. They also rescinded his university diploma. I wonder why they did that. Because the Turkish constitution says that to run for president, you need to have a university degree. So stripping him of his degree meant at a stroke they had delegitimised him. Why would you do that? It is so obvious what is going on here. And yet, from parts of the West, certainly from America, there has been silence. I've seen Donald Trump on Truth Social today posting about a portrait of him that makes him look a bit chubby. I've also seen him talking about George Clooney. I've seen him talk about lots of things. But he has not had a word to say about the locking up of the main Turkish opposition leader. Yeah. And frankly, Britain, not much better.
Yeah, this is really inflamed, particularly the young people of Turkey. I've been speaking to a lot of students in Istanbul over the weekend. And if you are 22, you have come of age in an era where you have not known any other leader than Erdogan. He's been president since 2004. Before that, he was prime minister. If you want to try and see a parallel, one that's staring us in the face is Putin, who moved seamlessly between prime minister and president until he basically threw out the democratic rulebook and decided he'd just get rid of the democratic election process completely. This is now looking as if it's Erdogan's playbook, that people who might not necessarily have supported the mayor politically now feel they have to be out on the streets, because if they don't, they will see Turkey's democracy vanishing. And so young people in their thousands have been heading onto the streets, and the pattern is this. They will go out after dark, after nightfall, and after about 3 hours, the crowd starts to thin, and then the police move in. And at that point, they can expect rubber bullets, they can expect tear gas, they can expect water cannon. Many of the activists are getting arrested as well. Many of the well-known journalists who've been critical of Erdogan are getting arrested as well. The students are, in a way, quite similar to the Hong Kong protests, now covering their faces so they don't get caught on facial recognition cameras and sort of hauled in. They've made more than 1,000 arrests. Now, if you talk to Erdogan and his party, they'll say these students are violent, these students are part of terror organisations, they can cite 12 different terror organisations, but essentially this is what a clampdown looks like in a place that is actually part of Europe, where we all go on holiday, where we know the cities and we rejoice in the cultural diversity and the beauty of a place like Istanbul, and it is going through an ugly crackdown now, which is starting really to spell the end, as you've said, of what looked like free and fair elections.
Yeah, and Turkish history is so interesting. I mean, obviously the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, and then you get Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who comes along and is the father of modern Turkey, and he becomes the president for the first Turkish Republic in 1923. And what are the first things he does? There has to be universal education, primary schools for all children to go. Equality of women. They must be treated equally under the law and have all the same rights as men. More advanced than many Western European countries. It was a secular country. It was going to industrialise. This was the modern Turkey blueprint. And Erdogan is much more. He's not a secularist. He's kind of, he's an Islamist in a lot of the ways that he's ruling.
What's happened really, and again I go back to the sort of Putin playbook. Erdogan started off as this moderniser.
Yeah.
He was a secularist. When he came in 20 years ago as Prime Minister, and ironically there are so many parallels here because he was also Mayor of Istanbul. He also got arrested and thrown in jail for 4 months for incitement to, I think, racial aggravation. He was then banned from standing himself until his party won, and he found a way of changing the system, the parliamentary system, to actually allow him to become Prime Minister. So in one respect, this is very odd for people watching in Turkey because they are seeing, with a kind of déjà vu, the same thing that happened to Erdogan now play out against his opposition leader. The difference is here that the man who started off leading Turkey to this incredible economic boom, incredible developmental boom, who was secular, then started slowly eroding it. This is what happens when you stay in power too long. He came in and banned women from having to wear headscarves. Now he's got rid of all the non-Islamic schools. Now he's starting to introduce more and more Islam into everyday life and into the school curriculum. And now he's starting to do away with democracy. He's anti-birth control. He's anti-LGBT. He doesn't think men and women are equal. All the kind of signs of somebody who's becoming more hardline because they've stayed in power too long and they haven't had anyone essentially competing with them, challenging them.
It's hard not to join the dots of what Putin has done in Russia, what happened with Lukashenko in Belarus. And look at Donald Trump's views on his opponents, that they're all wild-eyed fanatics, they're Marxists, they are scum, they should be locked up. That's exactly what Erdogan is doing. Erdogan is taking Trump at his word in the way that he is treating opposition leaders. And
those two are very... I talked to Steve Bannon nearly, 8 years ago, and I said, who does Trump admire most in the world? And Steve Bannon said, Erdogan. Yeah. That's his role model.
And just look at one other piece of this, and that is Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Now, Elon Musk, you'll remember, is a free speech absolutist. He believes free speech for anything, everything, anyone. He was absolutely condemnatory of the British over what they did when the accounts were kind of blocked of people who were posting on social media during the riots last summer. And he said Britain has ceased to be a free country. It is an autocracy. The jackboot of Keir Starmer is coming down on you. And what have we got now? Elon Musk blocking the accounts of opposition leaders in Istanbul who are fighting for democracy. It's just...
It's enough to make you wonder if he's actually trying to expand Starlink into Turkey, isn't it? I mean, with Elon Musk, there's always a commercial opportunity. And we know that Elon Musk's plans to expand Starlink, the next step would be Turkey, means that he wants to keep Erdogan on side. And more than that, I mean, as we've said, that the dots between Trump and Erdogan and Putin are becoming clearer and clearer every day. This is the model that they not only tolerate, but admire and want to emulate.
And the one cornerstone of Chinese foreign policy is you never criticise the human rights record of countries. Every country can have its own way of doing things. You deal with the government in power at the time and you don't say anything critical. That is how Donald Trump is emerging. It would have been unthinkable in any other presidency for the opposition leader of a democracy to be locked up on trumped up charges with no foundation, no basis whatsoever, and for the American State Department not to have anything to say about it, because America saw itself as the kind of the core of democratic values. And now silence.
Yeah. What we should say about the man who's now in prison, Ekrem Imamoglu, is that Sunday marked the primary election. And even though he was in jail, what happened was they put out, if you like, symbolic ballot boxes around the country. And these were for people who wanted to show their support but weren't necessarily of the party to post their ballot. And there were queues right around the blocks, and essentially he emerged with 15 million votes. 15 million votes from people who may or may not have liked the man at the centre of this, but definitely wanted to preserve the sense of free and fair elections in Turkey. And as a result of this, Ekrem Imamoglu is now the opposition leader. He is now the man elected to fight the presidency for the CHP party, even though he can't be there in person. Well, let us talk now to the Deputy Chairman of the CHP, the Republican People's Party, Dr. Ilan Uzgel. Dr. Uzgel, this is a very tense time for you, for your party. Everyone wants to know what's happening now. Let me start there. What is going on?
Well, we're under attack, and our party, our candidate in presidential elections, and our democracy is under heavily attacked by the government that has been ruling the country for the last 23 years. It has been cracking down political opposition. It has been cracking down civil society. It has been cracking down crashing all political opponents. Currently, a leader of a nationalist party is in jail. Many personalities, civil society activities, mayors, some politicians are present, even an ordinary person on the street, commenting on political system, criticizing Erdogan. If you post a critical Twitter, if you post a tweet critical of Erdogan, you can end up in jail. So this is what we have been going through, especially for the last 6 months. So this is how we are living in Turkey right now.
Dr. Uzgal, why do you think President Erdogan has chosen now to act in this way?
Well, he doesn't want challengers. I mean, he wants a political scene without real strong rivals and opponents. So because Mr. Imamoglu has been preparing himself, and we were supporting him as our candidate, as our nominee in the presidential elections. So as soon as he realized that he is a threat to his leadership, so he triggered a process and attack on our party, on Istanbul municipality, and on Mr. Imamoglu himself. That is so clear. Let me tell you that if Mr. Imamoglu did not claim that he's going to be a candidate in the elections, he wouldn't have been targeted.
Let me just put this to you, because I'm sure around the world, people don't follow Turkish politics that closely. The government has laid these charges against Mr. Imamoglu. Are they rubbish? Are they to be taken seriously at all? Is there any credibility in any of these charges that have been laid against him?
This has been so groundless. I mean, all the charges that pro-Erdogan and pro-government media talk about, terrorism charges, that they try to prove that Mr. Imamoglu has links with terrorist organization, has been aiding to terrorist organization PKK, has been collaborating during the elections with PKK elements. The prosecutor dropped these charges because there was no evidence. But if you followed pro-government media, you would be convinced that he was involved deeply in terrorist activities. And those corruption charges, let me tell you that all municipalities, all local mayors, they have been under public inspection regularly and constantly. All their financial transactions are surveyed, are under surveillance and under monitor. So it's not possible for a mayor to commit, embezzlement, to commit bribery actions, etc. So that's and the evidence, the indictment is so weak that he's been put into jail just for political motivations, and everybody knows it in Turkey.
The world is in an extreme state of flux right now. Turkey is a NATO member with the second largest army in NATO. What do you need to hear from NATO members? And are you hearing that?
We're not hearing that. I mean, I'm not talking about NATO members, but we're talking about our friendly political parties, our friendly governments in Europe, in the EU. So the reactions are, we find it a little bit weaker than we expected, especially from Britain. The British government did not put any criticism against these latest events. So we were a little bit surprised that we were expecting Brussels to speak up firmly against the democratic backsliding in Turkey. We were, I mean, of course, Germany's ruling government still, Mr. Olaf Scholz, criticized the decision of the court. But apart from that, the reactions from Western countries is quite weak.
Has your party spoken to Keir Starmer? Have you had, or do you have any message for him?
Our message to him that things are not going well in Turkey. We have a government that does not respect human rights and rule of law. So we want them to be more outspoken on these issues.
And do you think a lot of this is down to the fact that the person in the White House now is Donald Trump, and you've got the British government and other governments wanting to try and keep Donald Trump on board, and we know that Donald Trump has a very close relationship with Recep Tayyip Erdogan?
That plays a part, but we don't want it. But unfortunately, Mr. Erdogan had a phone call with Mr. Trump on 16th of March, and which was given to the media as a very cordial talk with conversation between the two leaders. We all know that Mr. Trump admires strong leaders, So Erdogan is one of his favorite guys in the world. So the arrest and the attack to Istanbul municipality and the attack on our party and Mr. İmamoğlu came only 3 days after his conversation with Mr. Trump. So we know that the United States is not interested in human rights abuses in its allies. The current U.S. administration has more problem with his allies, traditional allies, than with Russia or China. So it opens some way for Mr. Erdogan to attack the opposition forces in Turkey.
We understand that Elon Musk is now blocking the Twitter X accounts of those who support the opposition leader, Ekrem İmamoğlu. What would be your message to Musk now?
Mr. Musk is talking about freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So we urge him to respect those two basic values that humankind brought to today. These are the basic things that we should not lose. And if we lose them, we are going to lose the basic tenets of humankind. These are so important that we realize how important they are after we lose them.
Dr. Özgal, can we still call Turkey a democracy?
No, Turkey has moved into an authoritarian regime. If you're eliminating your opponents in the incoming elections, so you can talk about a democratic system. If you control 90% of media outlets, if you put any person who is critical of you into jail, if there is no separation of powers, if the judicial system is not independent, you can talk about the democratic system anymore. So this is what we are having right now in Turkey.
İlhan Özgal, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, in Riyadh today, further efforts to secure that elusive ceasefire in Ukraine with Russian hostilities continuing. Today it is going to be US officials meeting Russians. Yesterday the US side spoke to the Ukrainian defense minister, talks that the Ukrainian defense minister was quite positive about afterwards. But every time you look, every time you spend more than half a second thinking about it, the lack of even-handedness on the American side is just jaw-dropping.
And if you want to get inside the heads of those who are negotiating, go to, I would say this, wouldn't I, a podcast. Because over the weekend, the main US envoy, Steve Whitkoff, gave an hour and a half long interview to Tucker Carlson, formerly of Fox News, who's now sort of set up on his own. And it is the most jaw-dropping conversation that they have together, where Whitkoff reveals so much more about the whole process and about the feelings of the administration than you would assume he could possibly have intended. And when I started listening to it, it starts off quite well, because he talks about all the different negotiations he's working on, including Gaza, Israel. He says it's important to hear from Hamas as well as from Israel. He says it's important to listen. You have to hear from all the different voices in the room. And you think, okay, here's a man who's actually thought about negotiation quite well. Then the longer it goes on, the more batshit it becomes, or rather, the more revelatory it becomes about just how fond this guy is of Putin. And at one point you would have thought, oh, well, this is what you have to do to negotiate. I don't think that anymore. I think they love Putin. I think he loves Putin. I think Trump loves Putin. I think there's a lot of Putin love in the room. And that may be why what we're looking at is a complete asymmetry of demands in everything that they try and do now.
I also came away with something else. And Steve Whitkoff, who is the special envoy of the president to bring peace to Russia, Ukraine, to bring peace to the Middle East, obviously has a very long background in peace negotiations. Oh, no, sorry, wrong. He's a billionaire property developer, has absolutely no experience of any of it. And what I felt, the longer it went on, was just how little he knew. Yeah. And I kind of thought, I think we as journalists are really fantastic at dinner parties because we're these wide, shallow pools. We've got 3 or 4 minutes of knowledge on a million different subjects. But if you talk to us for 10 minutes,
it all disappears.
It all disappears. With Whitkoff, he became shallower and shallower.
Yeah, doesn't last 10 minutes.
He was using Kremlin talking points. He didn't know the different regions where there was kind of that he was trying to bring peace to. The more it went on, the less you realised he knew.
Yeah, let's give you a taste of that. But we should just remind you that when he says Ukraine is a false country, when he asks when the world will recognise occupied Ukraine territory as Russia, he is literally mouthing the very words, the very sentiments of Vladimir Putin, which is why the Moscow newspapers all over the weekend are saying, finally, America understands us. Finally, our leaders are talking the same language. Putin could not be happier with what Whitkoff said to Tucker Carlson this weekend.
In the second visit that I had, it got personal. The President Putin had commissioned a beautiful portrait of President Trump from the leading Russian artist, and actually gave it to me and asked me to take it home to President Trump, which I brought home and delivered to him. It's been reported in the paper, but it was such a gracious moment, and told me a story, Tucker, about how when the president was shot, he went to his local church and met with his priest and prayed for the president, not because he was the president of he could become the president of the United States, but because he had a friendship with him and he was praying for his friend. It was, can you imagine sitting there and listening to these kind of conversations? And I came home and delivered that message to our president and delivered the painting. And he was clearly touched by it. So this is the kind of connection that we've been able to reestablish through, by the way, a simple word called communication, which many people would say, I shouldn't have had because Putin is a bad guy. I don't regard Putin as a bad guy. That is a complicated situation, that war.
You bet that Putin prayed for Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is manna from heaven for Vladimir Putin, that as soon as he saw the potential of getting Trump back in, I think his worst nightmare was over. I mean, his day was made. So yes, there you have Whitkoff saying Putin's not a bad guy. He loves Donald Trump, not because he's president, but on a very personal level because they've got a connection. I mean, is it any wonder that Putin doesn't feel the need to offer very much in terms of concessions? Is it any wonder if you've got the actual chief negotiator repeating your talking points and declaring that Ukraine actually is Russian land, you don't feel you've got to work very hard at this anymore?
But you just get the impression that Putin is an absolute master of knowing how to tickle Donald Trump's tummy and to make Donald Trump feel special and loved and happy. And I mean, you know, when Whitkoff says it was hard not to be moved by it, I kind of was sitting here thinking, it's hard to take this seriously when it is so obvious, it is so transparent.
Why don't you realise you're being played?
Why don't you realise you're being played?
The whole world is laughing at you, and you don't realise you're being played.
Vladimir Putin's core understanding is flattery will get you everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's with Donald Trump, absolutely 100% true. And the other thing that Whitkoff goes on to talk about is these referenda that took place in various sort of majority Russian speaking parts of Ukraine, which were boycotted, which was seen as totally rigged, totally unfair, totally irrelevant when they happened after the invasion. But now Whitkoff is saying this as pure, firm evidence that these regions want to be part of Russia.
I think the largest issue in that conflict are these so-called four regions: Donbass, Crimea, the names Lugansk, and there's two others. They're Russian speaking.
Yep.
There have been referendums where the overwhelming majority of the people have indicated that they want to be under Russian rule.
Yes.
I think that's the key issue in the conflict. So that's the first thing. That when that gets settled, and we're having very, very positive conversations.
And Russia controls that. In fact, some of those territories are now, from the Russian perspective, part of Russia.
Correct. That's correct. But this has always been the issue,
right?
And it's sort of no one wants to talk about it. That's the elephant.
The other elephant in the room, I guess, is being the chief negotiator and unable to name the 5 regions of Ukraine either annexed or partially occupied by Russian forces. I mean, it's really interesting. I was speaking to a guy from Mariupol last week, a journalist, and I asked him how they work now, how they sort of lived, and he said, most people are speaking Russian now. So there are nuggets of truth in what is being said. And I said, do you feel Ukrainian? He said, we still feel Ukrainian, but it's kind of easier now to talk Russian. And he thinks the big mistake in 2014, he said to me, was that people should have been nicer to Putin. It's such a weird thing to hear that. If we had been nicer to Putin as Ukrainians in 2014, he would have stopped there. Now, I'm kind of thinking, Jesus, honestly, what planet are you on? Being lovely to dictators generally hasn't stopped dictatorial activity. But Whitkoff is now speaking as if he is part of that mindset, right? Where everyone that's been invaded has actually been graciously accepting of it. Everyone has now come to the same conclusion that Ukraine is now Russia and Russian will be spoken there. And the nicer you are to Putin, the more you get back.
Tell me this is a totally irrelevant point, but when Tucker Carlson says the other Lugansk.
Yeah, the Russian form of the word.
The Russian form of the word. Deliberately choosing the Russian form of the word, which if you are accepting that it is partly Ukrainian soil, it's Luhansk.
Look, the cat's out of the bag now.
Yeah, of
they
course.
do not like Zelensky. They do like Putin. I mean, there is a whole sort of subset of Republicans who they call, the sort of the Putin Republicans, right? The people who think that Putin shares white Christian, Anglo-Saxon, heterosexual values that they want to be part of, right? I mean, kindness and goodwill to all men and women out the window. But broadly, they think that Putin's on the right track and Zelensky, he's the Jewish guy in charge of Ukraine.
And you just go back to our opening conversation about what is happening in Turkey. It's all part of a piece. 2025 is going to go down as the best year ever to be a strongman autocrat.
Well, talking of people who very much aren't in that mould, Keir Starmer, as you know, has been trying to forge a way through this complicated relationship between Putin and Trump And I would say that Trump is probably more complicated than Putin right now. And Starmer has offered peacekeeping support to Ukraine to bolster support for Zelensky. And Tucker Carlson described this as a posture and a pose. Have a listen.
What the hell is going on with European League? Keir Starmer saying we're going to send British troops. Their entire military is smaller than the U.S. Marine Corps. The country is dying economically. All those countries are dying economically. Like, what are they thinking? What is that? Is that a posture? Is it a pose?
Well, I think it's a combination of a posture and a pose, and a combination of also being simplistic. I think there's this, this sort of notion of we've all got to be like Winston Churchill. The Russians are going to march across Europe. I think that's preposterous, by the way. We have something called NATO.
There we are, simplistic to think that the European countries would want to try and enforce a ceasefire if it ever comes in Ukraine. And that is the attitude of Donald Trump's chief negotiator.
I mean,
it's
Starmer
kind of
is
shocking.
Starmer is playing his poker face at the moment. He'll never say anything that is remotely sort of eyebrow raising to any of this stuff, but you must wonder what he's actually thinking inside, right?
You must think that he thinks it's the only game in town. Yeah. He's got to try and bring Trump on board somehow. There is no point in Keir Starmer turning around and saying, Donald Trump, you're an autocrat, boot-licking, fascist lover, and you're a piece of shit. It's not going to get him anywhere. So he's got to play this game in hoping that the European nations can bring Donald Trump on board. Good luck with it.
Denmark, which controls Greenland, it's not doing its job and it's not being a good ally. So you have to ask yourself, how are we going to solve that problem, solve our own national security? If that means that we need to take more territorial interest in Greenland, that is what President Trump is going to do, because he doesn't care about what the Europeans scream at us. He cares about putting the interests of America's citizens first.
So, like Russia, if you want it and you've got the power,
pick it up and take it.
You can have it.
Yeah.
It's yours. And so it's hard to see how this doesn't become a crisis for Europe, for NATO, if Donald Trump doesn't care a jot about the territorial integrity and says, I'm having it.
There was a really interesting piece, I don't know if you saw it, talking about the potential economic transaction between Denmark, Greenland and America that all comes back to one drug. What is it? Ozempic, which was invented by a Danish entrepreneur. Denmark has the patent and America wants it. Lots of fat people in America. And Trump is now trying to see a way through doing a deal whereby Greenland, Ozempic and America can all somehow be part of the same deal.
It's a funny old world we're living in. And back to the more prosaic matters tomorrow of Rachel Reeves and what she's going to do in her spring statement. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.